Namaste and greetings. I, Ritika Sundar, a researcher at IMPRE, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Ivamniti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, warmly welcome you all to IMPRE #Web Policy Talk. Today, we have gathered here for a special talk series on innovation and empowerment of ULBs for effective decentralization and accountability. This talk is a part of #Local Governance, which is organized by #IMPRE Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies. The moderator of today's session is Mr. Tikendra Singh Panwar, former Deputy Mayor Shimla and visiting senior fellow at IMPRE New Delhi. Sir, I request your permission to introduce the speaker and the discussants.
Hey, come on, you don't have to ask. Just go ahead, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Dr. Purnima Chauhan, IAS retired, was the Secretary of the Government of Himachal Pradesh. As a civil servant, she has rendered nearly 36 years of service in various capacities, including a stint as Special Secretary Tourism and later as Secretary of Culture. As she held the finance budget portfolio in 2005-2006, MAM has designed and implemented the gender-responsive budgeting policy for Himachal Pradesh. As Secretary, Administrative Reforms, she pioneered a district good governance index, the first of its kind in India, to rank all districts of Himachal Pradesh on governance benchmarks and indicators. Welcome, ma'am. We're also fortunate to have two distinguished discussants. Professor Mahalya Chatterjee is Professor, Center for Urban Economic Studies in the Department of Economics at the University of Calcutta. Professor Uday Shankar is Registrar and Professor at Hidayatullah National Law University in Raipur. Welcome, ma'am, and welcome, sir. We look forward to learning from our eminent speaker and panelists, and we look forward to an enriching deliberation. With that, I hand it over to Mr. Tikendra Singh. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, ma'am, for sparing the time and being the keynote speaker this evening. And well, thank you once again, IMPRE team, and of course, Ritika, for such a nice introduction. So, just to give a context, that #local governance is something that we initiated some time ago, and it primarily on urban and cities, though local governance means also governance in the countryside. And we have been discussing the way our cities have actually transformed, are in a kind of transition phase. And I think one of the important elements of #local governance happens to be the decentralized local governance. So it's not just decentralized governance, but it is also democratization of the local bodies and of the people, of course. I think that is something very pivotal, very important. And we are very happy and glad that Dr. Purnima Chauhan, in fact, Arjun, you may not be knowing that when I was sworn in, it was Dr. Purnima who was who was instrumental in that. I mean, she
Director of Urban Development.
She was the Director of Urban Development at that time, and that's how this took place. So yeah, so we have that very long association, and then kept on harping, and then and of course because she has a very rich experience, not just from the bureaucratic aspect, but also why local governance is so important, which is like kind of neglected. And this is Arjun, which I've always been pointing out. The cities are generally treated as adjuncts. Now, just to give a passing reference, though I didn't want to, but this is something that is really haunting me. And this is from today's Supreme Court's, one of the judges. I think it's not correct and also not prudent to quote the name of the judge, but I think the content of the judgment is something that we have to really discuss about. And that shows the mindset that we have of towards all those who are in the hierarchical institutions, towards the cities, towards city governments. And that is that, the city governments are responsible for the slums, for the proliferation of slums, and they're not doing their bit. I think this is completely erroneous. I'm coming from a judge of a very high caliber and from the Supreme Court is, I think, speaks volumes and volumes where we are placed and what long path that we need to trudge as far as reclaiming our spaces, for city governance, for what is ours. Actually, slums do not proliferate because of the failure of the city government. They proliferate because the city governments hardly have anything in their hands. There's no planning that the cities do. This is done by parastatals or organizations beyond their control. And I think it's a larger socio-economic concept that we have to keep in mind. So over to you, ma'am. I think we will be, and I'm told that you will be also making presentation through your PPTM, through the slides.
Just a few slides which I've already shared with Simi.
Perfect.
I'll mention when they become relevant.
Perfect. So over to you, ma'am. I think it's an honor for us.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Tikendraji, for your kind words. And of course, we go back a long way. And something which I will share also, that as Director Urban Development, I think it was a landmark when we actually did a city mobility plan in which, seeing Tikendraji cycling every day, he leads from the front. And we introduced non-motorized transport as early as 2012, actually, in our city mobility plan. And park and ride issues, etc. How to do that. That was also part of this. And I must say that this has become a part of the urban development CMP toolkit in 2014. And when I look at that, I see a lot of elements from the CMP Shimla which have gone into it. That makes me very happy. So cutting to the chase, of course, reclaiming spaces, reclaiming images is extremely important. And the single point focus on cities, I think, needs to shift. The first thing is perhaps that. And the other refrain that I have, I will call it refrain only. And that is a point which I made with even late Mrs. Ishar Judge Ahluwalia, that it seems that a one-size-fits-all formula is always adopted while making policy. And that is a misfortune of two particular areas. One, the mountains, and the second, the coastal areas. Both are very, very extremely vulnerable. Both are ecological resource providers with inadequate compensations coming from those who benefit. Both have to self-regulate. And unfortunately, the kind of, let's put it for want of a better word, the sacrifices that we do are not adequately rewarded or compensated. There is something called viability gap funding, which doesn't really cover any of the kind of sacrifices, again, for development purpose, which we make. Having said that, we will come to that point. But today's, I must say, I must congratulate IMPRI for having initiated this series. And couldn't have been a better time, because post-COVID revival, etc., the World Bank has also raised a flag on this one, that if you're going to restore economies, restore the social patterns, do not do it in a manner which was back to business as usual. So their report, which is Back to Better, is a very interesting report on climate resilience and how development can take place. And development today, in the absence of concern about local government, is no development. So the bottom of the pyramid is extremely, extremely important. And the edifice that stands on it, and we very proudly say that Indian cities, especially, are projected to contribute 70% of our GDP in the next hardly 8 years. And that is going to coincide with the termination of the Sustainable Development Goals also. But the point that remains is that just as today, when it was mentioned that cities are being, taking the flak for slums, that's not fair. The other thing is that cities are not only cash strapped, and it's not cities actually, it is lower ULBs which are cash strapped, which are skill strapped, which have hardly any manpower which is trained. And that was a gap which I tried to fill as Director Urban Development. And I consider myself singularly fortunate to have held urban development also, and then to have been Special Secretary for Urban Development, and then 5 years as Secretary Administrative Reforms. So one has seen the impetus of reform coming from the bottom also, the need for it coming from the bottom also. And when it was being imposed from the top, which sometimes is not bad, it can be actually adopted by the civil society at the bottom. But that particular reform on the top was not without having an ear and an eye for the needs of the grassroots. And that is why I consider myself fortunate, and I will try and share very briefly what those reforms are. A very stellar panel has been introduced in each of the webinars that IMPRI has had. And I'm very glad that we just had a very informal chat, that we are sitting here when it's snowing, almost it's snowing outside. And Professor Mahalya Chatterjee is sitting in Kolkata, and Professor Uday Shankar in Raipur. And this is the diversity that is the hallmark of not just our country, but also of urbanization. And this is the diversity to which customized solutions are important, not a one-size-fits-all formula. And that requires innovation. And that innovation will only come when there is an interest, there is a motivation, and there is an incentive. The challenges are many, which are vertical and horizontal communication linkages, lack of data, and citizen centricity in the reforms that hinge evidence-based policymaking, financial allocations for better accountability, exclusion of focus only on cities rather than on, first it was the parastatals, now it is the census towns. And now I think it is important that urban local bodies in mountain areas, particularly, I will speak for them, should be taken into account with all the constraints that they suffer. And very big among them is their populations. There are examples abound in JNNURM and otherwise of how, because of a population criteria which did not factor in the fact that mountains have less population. Shimla, for instance, being a capital city, was included in JNNURM, but otherwise on population basis would have been excluded completely. And that exclusion was again brought to the notice of the committee of the urban ministry, and some corrections have been done while making the smart cities framework, and fortunately for that. But the other exclusion, the other constraint that mountains face is, of course, a very limited working period, climatic constraints, very small populations. So when you impose any kind of a return on investment through a mechanism of fees, cess, etc., it is just not possible to recover all of that. Infrastructure provisioning is extremely expensive. When these issues are confronting state governments, how do we expect that small little urban local bodies are going to be able to tackle them until there is an intensive capacity building, skill training program, and then that program becomes global? For instance, it is not as if they only are receivers, passive recipients. I have seen urban local bodies which have a native intelligence, common sense, and I will share an example of the solid waste management done in Manali, where I felt that was such a good example of one person, an individual driven reform, because that man was passionate and he continues doing that. That is Mohinder from Manali. And if I can elaborate on that, if the time permits, I will do so right now. NGT had asked me to do a report on the solid waste management in a long linear belt running from Sundarnagar in Mandi district right up to Manali, which is an international tourist destination. Every ULB that I went to was performing on an average basis, nothing spectacular. It was only Manali which was doing extremely well. And when I actually saw it for myself, the person who was doing it was Mohinder, who was an EO. Manali is divided by the Beas River. And Manali being an international tourist destination, almost everybody who is somebody wants to have a hotel over there. And of course, people want to visit it. And this is a round the year destination. Now, unfortunately, one side of the Beas is urban and the other side of the Beas, which is very attractive in any case, is rural. Now, a lot of people had managed to purchase land, which is not easy in Himachal for non-agricultural, non-Himachalis, and made hotels, large hotels in the rural areas, because land was perhaps easy, they could manage to get it in whichever manner possible. And those hotels were spewing out their sewage, garbage, raw sewage and garbage into the Beas River, which became a matter of concern not only for the urban people, but also for the Pollution Control Board. Our EO, executive officer, what did he do? I saw him over there just in the beginning of Manali, where the Beas River continues to breach its embankments. This man had a very small landfill, and I asked him how he was filling that up, and how was he involved in filling something along the river embankment, which PWD department should have done. So he says, I have done a tie-up with PWD and with Pollution Control Board. So I was wondering, what sort of convergence has he done? His inert material, which is useless after 10 years, this man had made sure that this small landfill should be reused. We say recycle, reuse, refuse. This man was actually doing it in his practice. That landfill, what he did, he told the PWD people that when you have to make embankments, you have to do filling work over here. I will give you my inert material. You don't get material from elsewhere. By that measure, the PWD excavated his landfill, made it ready for use again and again. And he had ensured that methane gas does not build up. He had ensured pipes are inserted for release of the gas. He had also ensured that not just the landfill is, the inert materials removed, but he also made sure that his viability of solid waste management is done despite the fact that Manali had a very small area. It had all the constraints of mountain areas, that when a truck goes, there is dead mileage, there is no circular route, but the river is crossed by bridges at various points. So what did he do? He got the Pollution Control Board to come with their regulations. The man accompanied him. They went to the hotels on the other side of the river who were actually polluting the river. And they went, and using the Pollution Control Board's threat, he told them that in case you agree that our vehicle will pick up your garbage. Now, this was a rural area. He was going beyond his jurisdiction. But he made sure that he struck a deal with them that your full capacity, if you have 100 rooms, your tariff for your full capacity, a certain percentage of that will be taken from you as collection fees every month. But if you pollute, this is the penalty, which was much higher. And this is how he went about to each of the hotels. And then the truck could make a circular trip, collect enough garbage to make it viable. Now, this man today, even post-retirement, is ensuring that there is energy out of that waste also. And also there is a sharing of the cost of putting that energy into the grid, and that revenue is shared with the municipality. I haven't found another example of an end-to-end solution driven by one individual, all thanks to his passion. And when I asked him that how did you do something so differently, whereas others have not done it, he said, Madam, I just simply followed the Municipal Solid Waste Management Rules 2000. That is how humble he was. And these are the kind of citizens, these are the kind of officers who drive change. And these are the kind of people who should be incentivized. However, having said that, it is important today that when we are expecting climate resilience, etc., from urban local bodies, are we getting them ready for it? Are we building their skills for it? After COVID, we have a scenario which has shown us the mirror. Disaster responsiveness and preparedness, health provisioning, intersectoral cascading impacts that could be firewalled throughout the globe. Now, these are the things. Environment flourished while the human beings were locked in. Was the state the god that failed? Were it the urban local bodies that failed? Post-COVID, World Bank's paper is extremely relevant. And there are a number of examples from all over the world, especially from Sweden and Germany, which show how decentralized governance is institutionalized with citizens' participation ensured in a manner that every sector gets to participate not simply in suggesting policy, but in ensuring that it reaches their parliament. The solid waste management plant at the CSAV plant in Malmo is a point to be noted where They were performing at 98% capacity, picking up garbage from all over Europe, and yet saying, we are still not performing optimally because they were 2% short of 100%. They were planning to pick up garbage from China. What is the motivation that drives these people? What is the reason that when I asked a question over there, that your entire system depends upon segregation of garbage at the household level? If that doesn't happen, what are the penalties? And the manager of the plant says, I didn't understand your question. I said, in India, we have penalties for a lot of things. He still didn't understand because he says, why will we have such a provision? Everybody complies. And then I found my answer. The institutional mechanism of one person posting a suggestion through using in ICT enabled systems, that suggestion is taken so seriously by the municipality at the regional level until that suggestion gathers momentum, crowdsourcing, and then it is polished and reaches the parliament. This is how seriously there is an institutionalized system of people's participation. It's called the Malmo panel. We can do the same, but provided we have the funds, not just the funds and not just the functions and the functionaries, but also the funds which are devolved. The other innovation that which was just mentioned, which was data is the new oil. Today, we are looking at evidence-based policymaking rather than simply sentiment-based policymaking. It is extremely important that data which is being submitted to Government of India regularly, routinely, can we connect those random dots? You know, it's like the stars in the sky. You only see constellations when you connect them. And this is extremely important that there are 2-3 gaps which I see very commonly. We don't look at ULBs as, you know, repositories of traditional wisdom, which we should gather. We don't look at ULBs as those which can understand the nuances of extremely complex situations in the environment or in climate change or in gender issues or in resource management. But if we trust, and trust deficit is what besets our country, I think we have to overcome that if we have to have all 3 tiers of government working together, working in tandem, and making sure that it is not just them working, but it is a bottoms-up approach which is encouraged. Today, it is top-down, and which is not bad all the time, but definitely things like, you know, increasingly we are realizing customized solutions are the answer. So if city command and control centers are being effectively used in COVID, why can't that particular example be driven down? So we try to do something. Can I request Simi to just show that particular first picture from, yeah. So this was an award which I went to receive on the behalf of the state of Himachal, Department of Administrative Reforms. This was on account of the State Good Governance Index, which Public Affairs Center Bangalore had initiated. There is not even the Center for Good Governance has an index till now in India. Now, PSC Bangalore, and this particular initiative was headed by Dr. Matthew, retired Chief Secretary of Rajasthan, where on 82 parameters and indicators, they would assess the performance of each state on vital factors. The entire country was divided into two types of states. The smaller states, there were 12 of them, which includes the Northeast, Himachal, Uttarakhand, J&K, and also Delhi. This was based on less than 2 crore population. The rest of the country was the larger states. So Himachal was ranked #1 on the 82 indicators, not all of them, but overall. And Kerala was ranked #1 on the bigger states. Now, when we got this award, as a, you know, just as an experiment, I was told that we have to come and collect the award in Bangalore. So I asked them, I said, what is the criteria you used? So they told me, I said, send me the list of 82 indicators. When they sent me, I found that those indicators were relevant, not just at the state level, they were relevant at the district level, they were relevant at the panchayat level or the local body level. Now, when I asked my economics and stats department that, can you please find out? I mean, somebody else has ranked us number one. Normally one doesn't ask when one comes first in class, but I'm asking that, why did we come first and how did we come first? Can you give me the data on these 82 indicators? I could only get data on 12 indicators. Now it seemed that we were not connecting the dots. This was all secondary data. This was being submitted regularly, not only by us, by the whole country, to various ministries and other forums in the central government. But data tells its own story, and data is the new oil. This was proven when I went there, and when we understood how they had done this. I made a promise to them that when I come back, I will try to drill down this initiative at the district level without fracturing data. Whatever reports are going from the district level on vital areas of development, we will ensure that there is a district good governance index, which was developed and which we did. It took us about 3 years to do it because there were elections and it needed a very close participation of all the DCs and the district statistical officers. And DCs, being overloaded with many other activities, were reluctant partners until they realized that they had to sign the certification which we had asked them before they submitted the data. It is only then they woke up to the fact that what is this data and how is it, what does it end up in? Now this data became a report card for the district. And there were 14 vital sectors in this. And today I'm very glad to say that having initiated this, last year in March, Himachal Pradesh government announced 50 lakhs for the best performing district, 35 lakhs for the second best performing, and 25 lakhs for the third best performing district. Now this it has become a race now among the districts, and I am told by the economics and stats advisor that this now, out of 45 indicators, it has been enhanced to 75 indicators. I'm so glad that it is not just 7 themes, 18 focus subjects, and 45 indicators with which we started. It is now 75 indicators. So may this evidence-based policy making baseline continue to increase. And this, in fact, told its own story even at the stage when PSC Bangalore gave us the award. We continue to win the award next year also, which was a surprise because the indicators had gone up from 82 to 100. And today, when our state district good governance indicators have gone up from 45 to 75, I'm very glad to know that districts which had performed very well last year have fallen below, but not too much. So that means there is some stability, sustainability, and continuity. And this is the kind of evidence which is extremely important to combat political pressures and to make sure that development and funds go to those areas which need them the most based on this evidence, that it is not based on sentiment analysis. And that is why it is extremely important that data, and what we did, another thing that I must share, not only did we make it extremely transparent to be able to understand on all those 45 indicators, each one, the numerator, denominator, and the data from where is it to be picked, because the same data could reside in so many of the reports, in so many other different places. So each DC was given a booklet, and that booklet was circulated. How to calculate, what is the source of data? And the third booklet showed that what are you going to achieve by doing the District Good Governance Index? Not simply get an award, the award came later, but you will also be able to align and say that state good governance, if the state has performed well, let us say in health, which district is contributing to that particularly? And not only that, health is also a major indicator in Niti Aayog's indicators. So this was aligned to Niti Aayog's indicators. And further, it was aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. So today, a DC can easily say that if he has performed well on any particular one of those 14 sectors, he can claim rightfully that he has aligned and done well on the SDGs also, the linked SDGs. This linkage was not easy to establish. It was a very painstaking process of making each person understand, onboarding each person from the economics and stats, which today is very happy. And then to ensure that this is not an individual driven reform. I knew that our tenures are not certain. And hence, I just kept my fingers crossed that I should have enough tenure to be able to give an address to this reform. And luckily, we could do that. So now it has become the mandate in the rules of business allocation of Government of Himachal for economics and stats to continuously do this every year. And I hope, and in fact, there are a few states asking the state of Himachal, how did they do it? And they would like to replicate. The whole idea being replication. So any such reform, any such awarded innovation, we have also set up an innovation incubation center in our state training institute. That was also part of administrative reforms. The other thing we did over there was no reform happens to ensure a digital India if there is not a computer literate officialdom. So a digital literacy mapping exercise, it has been introduced in Himachal Institute of Public Administration. Every trainee who goes there, he is first subjected to this test in the orientation in 15 minutes. Whether he has already obtained level 1, level 2, or level 3 of computer knowledge or computer skills is assessed. That report automatically goes to his boss. And if he needs the next level of training within the next 6 months, he is requested to obtain that. If he has already been assessed in the last 3 months or 4 months, then he is not reassessed. Time is given to obtain the requisite training from HIPAA. Now, these are the kind of very low-cost initiatives, very low-cost reforms, and these were meant in order to ensure that our streamlined policymaking and understanding is not confined just to the state level or state interacting with the center. It drills down deep into the district, and then hopefully someday we will see such an index and such an understanding and appreciation of that and value placed on that. Today, what I see is a little disheartening. You have the Public Service Guarantee Act. After the right to information, this is perhaps one of the biggest entitlements. Unfortunately, there are very few people who know that they can get time-bound services as a matter of right. We have a long way to go. It is not just time-bound services which we should be giving to our citizens. It should be the quality of service also. It should also be the cost of giving that service, because governance is also a resource. And today there is a run for resources, and the demand far outstrips the supply. And that is why quality service provisioning, not just time-bound, quality service provisioning at a cost which is affordable is the future. And that can only be done once the understanding and the use of enablers in the environment, like big data analytics and an understanding of gender issues and why. It is not simply that you're correcting wrongs or disempowerment of so many centuries. Gender and involvement of women in the rural workforce has gone down in India vis-a-vis our neighboring countries, which is sad, because McKinsey's report clearly states if there is greater participation of women, rural or urban, in the workforce, there is a quantum leap in the GDP of that country. And if we want to see that quantum leap, which doesn't benefit only women, it benefits everyone, then it is high time that we look at the figures which show that in the last 15 to 20 years, we have reduced our women folk participation in the rural areas from 37% to some 25%, which is a radical change considering the economy was going up, women's participation is coming down. Nobody has questioned it. And the impact can be, and since this is IMPRI does impact analysis, it's extremely important to actually, the jury should be out on this one, because if we do the right thing of at least targeting 50% women's participation, we will be able to make a quantum leap of GDP growing from a mere 16% by 2025 with a business as usual approach. It will jump to 60%. Now that is the kind of target we are missing out. And then we talk of Atmanirbharta and vocal for local and targeting a $5 trillion economy, how is that going to happen? It will turn into a wish list until and unless our focus is at the bottom of the pyramid. Over to Tikender ji, and I think the rest we can discuss in the panel discussion subsequently. I would love to hear the others.
Ma'am, won't be you using your other slides?
I was thinking that in case I'm overshooting my time, but I can do that if you want to.
If you...
Okay, I'll just take 2 minutes to do that. Can you go back to the picture, please? Okay, next one, please. So as you can see, Public Affairs Index, PAI's Public Affairs, 2017, there were 82 indicators, 26 focus subjects, and 10 themes in the State Good Governance Index. And this is how, if you look at it, HP was ranked 1 in 2017, and in 2018 with 100 indicators, 30 focus subjects, and 10 themes, again, we were first ranked. In 2019, HP was ranked 2nd, and there was a change in the indicators, and they introduced 3 pillars also, which are very vital for any kind of tier of governance: equity, growth, and sustainability. Voice and accountability, regulatory quality, corruption, rule of law, government effectiveness. These were the 5 themes, and these themes are not very different from the others. So 13 SDGs where government has a role to play were separately linked. We have in the District Good Governance Index, which we developed, we started doing in 2017 and finished in 2019, early 19. We already introduced the linkage with SDGs. Now, and the last triangle shows the District Good Governance Index, 7 themes, 18 focus subjects, and 45 indicators, which have now increased to 75. Next slide, please. I think I've already said this, that we do need a good governance index. Whether it has happened at the central level or not, I'm very glad that Bangalore has one. And I'm very glad that Himachal has been able to drill it deeper to the district level. Someday in the near future, I'm very sure with the enthusiasm now generated not just by the award, but also by the fact that there is evidence-based policy making initiated. I won't say that it has taken root, but it has just started. So we will have probably a local good governance index. Next one, please. So these were the 13 departments, and there were 4 broad-based departments which spanned a lot more than just one sector. So these were the departments which are covered. And as you can see, there are certain missing the departments here. For instance, agriculture is not there, horticulture is not there, tourism is not there, excise and taxation is not there. These were very difficult to bring into the indicators. So that needed much more drilling. So we said, let us start small. And this is what we did. Next one. So these are the areas and themes that were covered. Essential infrastructure, for instance, power, water, roads, housing, support to human development, education, and health, and social protection, your public distribution system, social justice, minorities, employment, women and children, very critical, crime, law and order, violent crime, atrocities, environment, forest cover, transparency, and accountability. What was very significant that I remember in one of the cabinet meetings when I was sitting outside waiting for my item to come. So I was carrying 2 years trend of the state good governance indicators and which showed that which department has actually fallen or improved in the last 1 year. And it was very heartening to see the secretaries who were going in for their cabinet items coming to me and saying, Purnima, हमारे विभाग जैसे PWD है, last year क्या position थी, इस साल क्या position है? So has it improved? I was very glad that, setting the cat among the pigeons was very, very difficult. But if this is the concern that has been raised now, I think our effort was well worth it. And it was important to see how secretaries were now laying store and giving importance to the fact that whatever they do, I'm not saying that they're doing a shoddy job. It is just that performance can be benchmarked, performance can be evaluated. One doesn't have to say that this, in fact, I was subjected to this also. When I presented in the cabinet, everybody said, ye data tumhara galat hai. Fortunately, we were using secondary data. I said, well, I have just used the data which you are submitting to the central government, to your ministries regularly. I've just linked the dots, nothing else. And data tells its own story. Gradually, the trust grew. Gradually, they started to believe. And I think now they must be using it as a template to probably pull up their own departments. Ki last year, tumhari position ye thi, is saal kya hai? So trend is revealed. And that is what I hope will continue to, will be drilled deeper to cover the local bodies. Thank you so much. This was some of the secondary data sets. So there can be different, on each indicator, there will be multiple data sets. You have to choose which one you're going to use for your formulas and for your numerators and denominators. It was not easy. There was a reason given even for allocating weightages in the booklets. So there has been a lot of work which has been done on the DGGI. We'll be glad to share all of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. So without any further ado, let me invite Professor Mahalya Chatterjee to give her thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chauhan, for a nice talk, which covers many things. I would start with the first one that is very relevant in our context, in India's context, where you have rightly pointed out that we have diversity of things whenever cities is concerned, and so that one size does not fit all, but we try to fit them. And in that point, we lose the question of innovation and attractiveness of the local bodies, or any sort of local bodies, not only urban, but also in the rural set. That is, we forget the role of innovation whenever we talk, we impose a sort of central plan or a state plan on the local bodies. Firstly, I agree with you that that the single point focus on cities should go. Rather, we should focus on mid-level or second tier cities, and also the lower level because if we don't look at the lower level at the first thing, then when they grow up, things become already they're messed up. So one cannot, managing those things becomes more and more difficult. And of course, there are ecological diversity and others. I'm not going into that. And the first thing is that so-called the post-COVID revival and the role of the local bodies, the so-called representatives and others have become very important. And it's time that we have reached with the climate resilience and other things. But the point is that how to do it. In growing up in West Bengal and doing on a thing, decentralization, devolution, democratization was something we heard for a long time, long time. Because in fact, sometimes we laughed at it, that what these 3 Ds will take us to. Only talking about democratization, only for setting up the so-called ward committees, gram sabhas and etc. What they will need, because as you have rightly said, that the cash strap and skill strap situation, even if we think of that the gram sabhas and ward committees will find out the priorities and others, if they're cash strapped, if there is not enough technological and other supports and human resource, then will it be possible for the local bodies to carry on all these tasks, even if they are said by them. I can give one example which can show that that what would happen. Now in West Bengal, we had a program which is called the Kolkata Urban Services for the Poor, KUSP, which started with Kolkata metropolitan area municipalities, and later it was spread to all the municipalities in West Bengal. It was from the period 2004 to 2008. 2011, just before the change of the guard. Now, one of the initiatives taken by this KVSP program was the sort of finding out the sort of demand survey type of thing, that what the actual people are wanting and whether the municipality is a position to supply them in terms of technology, in terms of its capability, and also the human resource, in human resource. And of course, there were some local economic development plans, LEDs. Now, I can give you an example that which shows what you have taken about that one size fits all. Now, one of the, for local economic development, there was two things. That is the parlor training for the girls and giving cycle rickshaws to the male members. For their local economic development. Now, I did a comparative study of two municipalities. One is Bhatpara, a very old municipality in Calcutta metropolitan area, which was basically a jute town. Lots of jute mills were there at one time, but now that is a mixed population, mixed heterogeneous population of different migrants are there. Everybody is there. And that is a class 1 city in terms of population. And another was Dainhat, an agricultural, basically a town on the bank of the Ganges in Bardhaman district, basically with an agricultural background, a very small municipality. Once upon a time, it was a vibrant agricultural market, but now that is not. Now, when I compared the efficacy of this giving cycle rickshaws to the boys and parlor training to the girls, what I found a very funny thing, that if you go on giving cycle rickshaws to the boys in a crowded, already crowded municipality like Bhatpara, then they have no place to run even their rickshaws. The roads become congested with so many rickshaws, but there are then the police objected, the traffic police objected that why so many rickshaws. So there is a confrontation between the police and the municipality about the efficacy of the program. And also for this sort of parlor training. They are not, the girls, they got the parlor training, they got involved somewhere, but they did not find job in their city. They have to commute by rail to find parlor jobs to other municipalities where they are also given their girls also given the parlor training. So there is an oversupply of girls with parlor training. But if you go to a smaller town like Dainhat, which is not so vibrant with an agricultural background, the cycle rickshaws were lying idle, just lying idle because there is not much demand for a cycle rickshaw in that small municipality. The visitors are not many. The local people, most of them have their own cycles. So the cycle rickshaws, after some days, they got rusted or something like that. So even in a smaller program and for the parlor training, after 2 or 3 initial months with the initial euphoria gun, people, the girls were not at all interested in this parlor training type of thing. Rather, they wanted something which gave them, what type of training like tailoring or others, which were more in demand. But the municipality did not have the infrastructure to give them such type of training. So this is something that when you try to impose something without forgetting that each municipality is different and their need for the local people are also different. What suits fits one place may not fit another place. That is one. Now you have given an example in a Manali of a person who went beyond his jurisdiction and others and could initiate a sort of solid waste development plan or on the whole a pollution control plan, which not only saved the river Bias but also the total thing. But the problem with this, that one man's innovation, if there is not sufficient skill development, you are right about that, that cannot be carried after that man, after that particular man. So there should be, rather than being a person-based thing, yes, he has innovated, but he should be supported by the government, by the so-called supporting structure, so that those can be carried out. We have ample examples that there are cases, a good initiative gone hayway because that person was no more there. No more there. We have seen lots of there. And of course, the district development index which you are talking about, you have said that the districts have become interested. So there is a competition and everybody wants to improve. Everybody wants to improve. That's a very good thing. That's a very good thing. But again, there is a fear. There is a fear that if there is not sufficient monitoring and others, it may happen that data maybe, I'm not saying that everybody is dishonest or something, but there are chances that data will be generated in a different way. Because we have ample evidences of that. I have some personal experiences about that, which I don't want to discuss in this public forum. But again, this type of indexing, this type of competition may lead to this this type of environment. That what starts with a good intention may go hayway just because of over enthusiasticness. In our student days, we heard examples in what is going on in Soviet Union. Soviet Union about data generation and other things. And it showed that that was not a good thing for Soviet Union on the whole. So in the last point, I'm coming to about this, that our urban local bodies, when we think of the 74th Constitution Amendment, if we think they have three parts. First is about the regular election, people's representation and others. Somehow all the states of India has adopted that. Maybe because of keeping their power, all the political parties were interested, maybe for keeping their power to the grassroots level, bringing their power and so and so. But the other two parts, that is the finance part, the state finance commissions were appointed. They gave their recommendations, but there are hardly any case that recommendations were finally implemented. The urban local bodies, the rural local bodies still are in the same position. They are with a begging bowl to the state, to the center, and they are waiting for the any sort of scheme or project or mission coming, and they will tailor their needs according to that. And the third part is again a part of negligence, that is of planning, of spatial and economic planning. The 12th schedule gives the list of things to be done by the urban local bodies. There are repetition. The 18 things could be brought into 8 if the list were more wisely made. But if you see, they again overlaps with the functions of other departments, and this is a thing which is totally neglected. We know the fate of this Metropolitan Planning Committee, District Planning Committee, and others. If we really want the local government to be vibrant, then this planning part should be revived. And of course, like these cash trap parts, etc., should only, if the Finance Commission recommendations are really implemented, and we really find out ways to raise the own resources of the local bodies. Let me stop here just now.
Thank you so much, Mahalaya ma'am. So now over to Professor Uday Shankar sir. Uday sir. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Arjun. And it was a very enlightening one to listen to Dr. Purnima and the kind of insight Madam has shared on the issues of urban local bodies. I'll just make a few pointers on the very rationale of strengthening the third tier government. Because when you look at a kind of statistics across the world, you would find more than 50% of the population in this whole world gets governed under a legal system which has both central and provincial government. So in a way, federal system or two-tier system or multi-tier system is tested one, tried one, and appears to be bringing the benefit to the people. When I look at the benefits of local power, the reason why we should stress upon strengthening the urban local bodies, it all reflects from this point that the citizens' preferences will get better addressed when we have local government. And public servants will also work with more commitment, with greater sense of a belongingness, because of the kind of incentives which the work would bring to them. And in fact, what Madam was telling was somewhere reflection of that. That being a part of administrative mechanism, the way she passionately narrated the changes. So this factor of incentive plays a very, very important role. And then smaller is the jurisdiction. It has generally been said that it fosters greater sense of communitarian feeling. And that is something which ultimately addresses the responsibility, addresses the goal of citizenship, because it is this communitarian feeling which is at the core of the idea of citizenship. And legally speaking, it is about enjoying the same set of rights. It is based on the premise of non-discrimination, and also expecting more or less same amenities from the government. So that's what is something which is a sort of benefit of a smaller jurisdiction. And also a smaller jurisdiction increases the quality of interaction. And that's why you find that wherever there is a regular election happening and happening on a very fair and transparent manner, public amenities are being delivered in a better manner. So it is more about ensuring public servicing as an entitlement than as a sort of charitable act. And if people are given, if they are assured amenities, basic amenities, it is but natural that they will follow the rules which would make the society a coherent one, well compact one, and a neat one. And that in a way would certainly make the implementation of law smooth, and it will also ensure better enforcement of laws. So local government, strengthening of local government plays a very significant role in establishing rule of law. And then also the multiplicity of jurisdictions facilitates in managing risk. I mean, in the last 1.5 years or so, we have seen the importance of local government, where finally with the kind of trend which started with a national lockdown to contain the spread of virus, narrowed down and came to this point where it was instructed to the local authority to notify the lockdown as per this situation warranted. So this is what is the strength of local government. Now, Professor Chatterjee has rightly highlighted, I would say, the constitutional scheme to strengthen third-tier government. And in fact, when you look at the subject matters which are enlisted there, which Madam has highlighted, Schedule 11 and Schedule 12, you'd find that every subject matter is there which connects with people and which promises a better life to people of this country. But then when it comes to implementation, it appears that there is some deficiency. And deficiencies, to my mind as a law student, is the absence of very concrete framework at the municipal level. For example, municipality does not have any cadre. Now we have a state cadre and we have a central cadre. So something which has been planned by municipality, who is owning that? So if you make the state government to plan for municipality, then it is the responsibility of the state government to own it. And then somewhere in that process, everything gets diffused. It does not get that attention which is desirable. And this is very important because every municipality has its own focus area. The problem of solid waste may be different for Simla and may be different for Raipur. So you have, I mean, in order to ensure the accountability, first we have to generate that feeling of belongingness. And that would come only when you have a cadre, the way we have a state cadre and central cadre. So one way of ensuring accountability is to have a municipal cadre. The way municipality is being governed on administrative side, it is always through an officer belonging to the state cadre or belonging to, obviously, it belongs to state cadre, but either belonging to state PCS or, IS cadre. So why not? There should be an cadre be developed, which will also enjoy the same authority, which is with PCS and UPS. So that is one. The second point with which I'll conclude, because I believe my role was very limited being a discussant, but because the topic is so close to my heart, and perhaps that's what made Dr. Arjun to extend an invite to me. The way we have been attempting a reform in municipal governance, either through privatization process or through technology-driven governance. Now, they have their own benefit. I'm not discounting it. Privatization has its own benefit. Technology has its own benefit. If I have to travel from one corner to another corner in a city, Google can guide me what time to start so that I can confront lesser traffic. But then when it comes to grievance redressal, when it comes to accountability of elected representative, I strongly advocate to not to bring in any change in the framework which exists as on date. We have a system where we have elected representative, or be it councillor, be it mayor. We need to strengthen these institutions and not to replace it with another system in the name of efficiency, in the name of better management. Because the representative scheme which is given in the 74th Constitutional Amendment and which has been truly translated through laws in almost every state has its own benefit. I, as a resident of Raipur, will always have this belief that I can make my elected representative more accountable than CEO of Development Authority. Because every 5 years he has to come to me to seek my vote. And I can always, question him about his performance. That is not the case with CEO. So let this system not be diluted. So with this, I thank IMPRI, and I also thank Dr. Purnima Chauhan for giving a very great insight on the issues, and also Professor Mahalya Chatterjee. Thank you, Dr. Arjun, and thank you, Dr. Srimit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. So we also have Samir Unhale, sir, who is Joint Commissioner at Department of Municipal Administration, Government of Maharashtra. Samir, sir, why don't you go on? Your remarks.
So first of all, thank you very much, Arjunji, for this opportunity of interacting with on this occasion. India's urban system, as I do reiterate every time, is very huge. It is very varied, and it will be a third largest country of the world in its own right. That's the population India's urban system has, and the challenges that we are facing are moving exponentially, and therefore we require great innovation to engage and to solve and tide over the challenges that India's urban system is facing. So in this context, I think the 4 keywords that I found out in this talk, mostly of innovation, of empowerment, of decentralization, of accountability, are really very important and very relevant to the day-to-day city living which our urbanites are facing. So when we talk of governance, we essentially talk of powers to make laws and raise taxes. And the municipal approach of handling India's cities has been a dominant one. It has been for more than 150 years in India. and it does resonate with the basic philosophy of democracy and democratic decentralization. Of course, we are working on through this approach for so many years, and I think we need to try out various new approaches for handling this day-to-day functioning. When we think of challenges that India's urban system as well as the global urban system is facing, currently, of course, we talk of pandemic or the general health scenario. We talk of the climate actions, which are very real, though we find very little resonance on that. We find population, we find mobility, we find the core municipal functions like water supply, solid waste management, and also the additional discretionary functions that are given to us. But then when we think of whether the existing system that we currently have and we currently profess, is it sufficient to resolve the challenges that we have? Or then we should we innovate on it and try to empower various organizations which are working within the urban system? I think also needs to be seriously thought. I had an opportunity of working as the CEO for the smart city, and there is very often this sort of dichotomy between representative democracy as being the solution for everything at the local level. Of course, I know I'm trading into rough waters, that democratic decentralization and representative democracy is the core of the way India lives. But I think there can be experimentation tried, seeing the day-to-day functioning of municipalities, the probability of institutional captures, if I may say, by thug elements is not very rare. It's not rare. These are the day-to-day challenges of the Bahubalis and such components taking over the municipal government, and then the municipal staff trying to work through this and then attaining all these ideals and goals is not exactly a very easy task. It may not be appropriate, but there have been many incidences in which the municipal staff has been attacked and stabbed, or whatever done by the thug element, which tends to take over the democratic representative governance in the actual hurly-burly of the functioning. So what I feel in this, that when we are talking of innovation, when we are talking of empowerment, when we are talking of decentralization, I think various institutional approaches, including development authorities, including smart cities, including community-based organizations, including private sector, needs to be brought into the urban India now, because in my personal view, my experience, which may be inappropriate or which may not be exactly fully encompassing all the options, but I feel we have reached a stage in which no single institution face the challenges of urban India. We require a collaborative approach. We try to experiment and innovate and try out the various ways. It's only then we could try to reach overcome the challenges that we have. Second, of course, was the issue of finances. The ability of the local bodies to raise their own revenues is fairly limited. I think apart from property tax, there is no serious income opportunity that the municipalities have. And I think it may be sounding a bit outlandish, but maybe there could be a part of the GST which could be given to the on the source of the expenditure. Of course, I know it's very difficult, but I think there is a time now that we need to give some financial empowerment also to the local bodies to discharge the duties that they have. As otherwise, as Madam had said, the municipalities had to just go and stand in front of the state government or the central government to release the funds for which they have to depend upon this. So I think financial innovations are also necessary, and the private sector or the corporate sector or the community-based organization or the CSR should be given some opportunity. We need a collaborative framework, and sometimes commercial organization is more accountable than government functioning. We all are utilizing telephone or maybe cable TV or maybe even private taxis, and we tend to see that the accountability is not essentially focused only linked with government sector. It can be other way around. So what I'm just suggesting is that when we are talking of innovation in managing India's urban system, we have to think of all the possible options. And we will have to experiment a lot. There might be some mistakes, there might be some shortcomings, but the approach of municipal monopoly over urban areas, I think is a bit getting stretched a bit far. And despite all the the strengthening which the municipal system require, the finances which they require, we totally agree on that. But I think when we are innovating, some experimentation necessary. Secondly, of course, direct democracy or participatory democracy is an idea. Could be a political innovation which could be experimented in some way in Indian cities. That very often I mean, it's not that I'm saying anything against representatives or something, but this approach would temper in a way to an extent whether the digital, I mean, I have worked as a CEO for a smart city, so sometimes I do find great enthusiasm in digital tools which are available for us to solve our problems. The tools are tools, they are our servants, they are not our masters. But the urban system has to show some dynamism to adopt these technological tools and give a better service delivery to its citizens or to its clients, as a corporate sector might say. So in digital framework, in innovation framework, there is a lot of things to be done, and things need to be done very fast. For the challenges are rising exponentially, and even the slightest glitch can create a major hindrance or major disruption into the city that we saw, especially during the during this pandemic. So I mean, Arjunji, I just had two thoughts to share here in context of innovation and empowerment of urban local bodies. That municipal monopoly needs to go. It has its limitations, and whatever we might idealistically say, practically on ground, things are in such a way that we cannot hold the city at ransom just for some idealism. Secondly, decentralization, yes, but decentralization is not essentially only within the government structure, but also within all the segments of the society. And I think in accountability, again, real-time governance is coming fast. It's not that it is only in Europe or in the USA. We have seen in the smart city framework that these new approaches, new innovations in managing India's urban system, in municipal approach or in non-municipal approach, we do see a lot of promise which could be tried out. And yes, we shouldn't stop from experimenting. We shouldn't be shy of making mistakes. And I think time is very less. And if we don't make some credible moves today, we might slip out of tomorrow indefinitely. So thank you, Arjun. These are very limited points to which I wanted to share in front of such esteemed panel. So thank you, Arjun.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your thoughts. I would like to invite Dr. Purnima Chauhan to share her views on the discussant's remarks. And perhaps, ma'am, you could also take the two questions that have come up on the chat box from the audience.
Yeah,
one is on, today there was an All India Mayors Conference, and the Prime Minister of India had made several suggestions. So do you think that these can be achieved, especially given the financial constraints faced by the urban local bodies? And the second question is, when you mentioned variation in the participation of women and the numbers related to it, what would be the source of these numbers? Also, what is the exact process in which their participation is concerned?
Yeah.
Ma'am, over to you.
Thanks, Simi. I'll take on those comments first. And as regards the mayor's, conference today, and the expectations from them. In fact, I was going to come to that point myself, saying that this is not new. In fact, the short answer to that is, as Gandhiji said, be the change that you want to see. Those expectations, are they being delivered at the state level or the central level, is a question that I think the jury should be out to consider that before any expectations are made from the urban local bodies. The second thing about women's participation, well, there are numerous sources, and the most authentic one would be McKinsey. And women's participation is vital. It is so many countries which are now focusing on it, and many targeting to reach 50% at least before shooting beyond that. In fact, Myanmar is already at 74% participation. However, Myanmar may not be the best benchmark to go by, but there are many others. And I would strongly suggest, because the question is anonymous, and they can go through McKinsey's report and many others. And in fact, what is more important than just the question is the fact that increased participation has a direct correlation with increased GDP. And that doesn't benefit only women, it benefits all of us. So I'll leave that question over there. Very important points have been raised by Professor Mahalia, by Professor Uday Shankar, and by Mr. Samir Unhale. Before I come to those, I will just like to set the backdrop by saying what NIUA, NUPF, and modern urban sutras, which have come out for the urban local bodies, very briefly what they also impose, that this is what urban local bodies should deliver. Well, the wish list is rather long. That you customize city development to sink its human capital for livability, economic ability, and sustainability. This translates into a 6-point charter, citizens being at the core, more from less, achieve more from less. And I'm imagining that refers to better resource use or optimal resource use. Cooperative and competitive federalism, much has been talked about this. Convergence, and convergence is something we battle with every day in the government, because sectors and departments function in silos. And I think it's very, very important that when municipalities are small, minor, I mean, they are like a microcosm of the government, they face this every day. Technology is a means and not the goal, obviously. And at the end of the spectrum is inclusiveness. Here, I would like to say that the Sustainable Development Goals themselves talk about the overarching goal of leaving no one behind. I find it very difficult that how did 192 countries actually sit together and even settle for 17 Sustainable Development Goals, even agree to that. So I think that is the first big barrier that they have crossed. So let us look at, the expectations made from cities or from urban local bodies. Fluid city master plan should lend dynamism and proactively be responsible, participative, inclusive. You should move from traditional land use planning to specialized clusters and linkages. And that means revisiting the UDPFI guidelines, which would be incorporating transferable development rights, transit-oriented development, green building codes to be actually implemented, not simply enshrined, Internet of Things, and with using examples of cities, ubiquitous cities like Songdo in South Korea as an example. The other requirement is unified. This is it seemed like a utopian list. Unified governance through converged platforms. So again, breaking down the silos. Improve green and blue infrastructure. So yet NIUA's Climate Smart Cities Assessment Framework, it covers cities with more than 5 lakh population. Now this is the point I made right at the beginning. Often mountain cities get ignored. This criteria excludes vulnerable, besieged mountain cities like Shimla that have merely 3 lakh population. And you know how much floating population we have? Nearly 25 lakhs floating tourist population, which doesn't get accounted for. This is a point I made with JNNURM also earlier, and they had conceded this. They said, we are sorry, we missed out the floating population. And you know what that missing out means for Shimla? For Himachal? Himachal's own population is less than 70 lakhs. But the floating population of tourists throughout the year is 2 crores. It's almost 1:3. Who are we making the infrastructure for? Is each tourist contributing as much as he's taking? These are actual real-time concerns. This requires consultation, it requires research, and then it requires putting a cap on the number of tourists like Bhutan has done. Well, so are you going to give up revenues, or you are actually protecting the environment? These are very real questions. So an MOU has been signed recently with IIT Kharagpur for collaboration on the project Building Accessible, Safe and Inclusive Indian Cities, briefly called BASIC. A welcome step, but it is not clear how brownfield urban local bodies, again I'll give the example of Shimla and example of Manali, will benefit from urban and regional development plan formulation and implementation guidelines rejigging if mountain criteria is not separately created to assess their capacity. And capacity for what? For infrastructure, amenities, services, for outdoor environment, livelihood, urban mobility, public transport, IT connectivity, digital, the list is very long. Now, these are the kind of expectations, which probably answers that issue of, what expectations are made today. But then let's come down to the very real questions in the backdrop of reality, which Professor Mahalia raised. Extremely important. Skill development has been done, NULM, NRLM, many programs. And now, of course, every state perhaps has a skill development corporation, and you have a ministry for that. Parlors and cycle rickshaws is what she mentioned. And I also, when I was, as director of urban development, it used to really, that time there was no concept of, we were just imparting skill. We were not seeing whether it is leading to employment. And that is a requirement I imposed myself. And I was so glad later that this requirement was actually made part of the skill and part of the release of funds also. However, one can go even further. A very important point she raised was that do you actually need so many parlor trained girls or your cycle rickshaw trained boys? Is it relevant to the area? Now, relevance of the demand and the supply has to be assessed. A market assessment has to be made. So at that point of time, I remember, this was 2011-12. If you recall, there was something called Just Dial. It still exists in the cities, and I think it's used very frequently. That you want a nursing, facility, or you just want to find a restaurant in an area, you just dial that number, and soon enough, you'll get a WhatsApp or you'll get a message, SMS, telling you how many restaurants are there or how many nurses can be procured. And then after that, you do the research from that data which has been given to you. Now, when we train somebody, or rather even before undertaking that training, what is the quantum of requirement is a statistical analysis which needs modeling. And this is not just logic for ULBs. It is logic for, this is precisely the point I made. When we do service delivery in government, we think just by giving skill, we've achieved what we have to. वो skill की ज़रूरत कहाँ है? That mapping is extremely important. We have tools today for mapping even land use, and we have GIS and other things. Can we have a similar thing for doing demand assessment before we actually embark? Skill money is taxpayers' money. It has to be spent rationally. And I mean, let's not have square pegs in round holes. So this is an area of concern and an area of research. So this is also like, affordable housing. So many houses built when nobody wants to occupy them. So the mismatch between demand and supply really needs to be addressed. I remember in Rajiv Awas Yojana, when each day, and I think Tikendraji will share this, that when the municipality, the corporation used to send its people there to ask the slum dwellers, okay, to participate, the response was very lukewarm or very hostile. And when we looked at the composition of the committee, which was trying to go into affordable housing, we realized there were no women on it. Just that one little change of having women on it enabled us to get fantastic housing plans, because the women were able to factor in, okay, there are small children in the family, there are elderly people in the family, newly married people. So how should the toilet be placed or done, or where should the bedroom be? So the design aspects came out to suit their needs. And that is where, need-based approach is extremely important. Reform has mortality. Very true. Individual driven reform that I mentioned has mortality. I myself was very afraid that our district good governance index would have an early death once I left that department. And so my one concern was not headlines or anything. My concern, not even awards, no acknowledgement. I just wanted one thing. I knew it was good for the state, and I wanted that it should find a house. Ye beghar na reh jaye. So what I did was ensure that once the cabinet approves, they not only approve the scheme and its implementation year after year, but ensure that that is changed in the rules of business allocation of the government of Himachal. So today, Economics and Stats has the responsibility to do this analysis every year. And that is how it gets a momentum of its own and becomes embedded. So that is how a reform really needs housing. It is very heartening, that to see a DGGI now becoming a regular feature. So, but again, for that reform to remain contemporary, remain relevant, today the world is changing at such a fast pace that regular skill upgradation will soon be required, even for the next set of people, whether in statistics or whether in the district, to be able to carry on with the district good governance index in a manner that it is a dynamic instrument of trending development and reporting development, assessing development. So that, capacity building at every stage is extremely important. There was another point that Professor Mahalia raised was unshackle the State Finance Commission from the political bondage. Very important. But at the same time, the 13th Finance Commission had made some very, very important recommendations, which I think also refers to Professor Uday Shankar's point that, the 74th Amendment, 73rd and 74th, they were good. They were good in spirit. Probably implementation was lacking. But I must say that the 13th FC went back to the basics and ensured that throughout the country, leaving aside the last of the third levels of local bodies, every state was supposed to certify on 9 or 10 parameters, which were actually harking back to the initial spirit of the amendment. And that was each state was to certify whether regular elections were being held, whether there were accounts opened for the ULBs and funds were to be received directly through to the ULBs to be parked by the state, not for more than 5 days. There was an interest liability charged from the state if they were parked for more than that much time, whether there was an ombudsman, and very important was whether there was service level benchmarking. And that service level benchmarking was such an important reform for sanitation throughout the country. So much work had been done. It was extremely useful because the quality of data was also being assessed by institutes like ASCI Hyderabad, and states, all of them, in fact, all the urban local bodies were made to not just notify their intentions, but to calculate first what they want to achieve. For example, if 135 liters per capita per day is to be guaranteed to each citizen, now water. Now it was assessed first, what are we supplying? For instance, a municipality is supplying, let's say 80 LPCD. So what is the gap? 35 plus 20, 55 LPCD. They were supposed to achieve it in 3 years. Now it was left to the municipality to discuss, debate, and decide whether they can do it, a quantum of it in the first year, then the second year, and then how much in the third year to reach that 135 LPCD benchmark. Now, in that process, assistance was to be given to the ULB, but unfortunately, in the process of certification, there was very little time for urban local bodies, at least in smaller ones, to be able to understand what are SLBs. And the system was excellent. It had indicators, sub-indicators, which boiled down to the basic functioning at the municipal level. Unfortunately, these 4 areas, one was stormwater drainage, the other was sewage, it was drinking water, and it was solid waste management. There were 28 indicators. And unfortunately, these SLBs, once this entire exercise was done for the country, data was analyzed, its quality was marked as A, B, C, D, based on whether the data was only done on the desk or it was actually from the field. And we also received certain very interesting and humorous queries. So having done all of that, why is the service level benchmarking languishing on the back burner? Why is it not being used today? There is a cost attached to this reform, again coming from the taxpayers' money. But why is it languishing after the 13th Finance Commission had finished with it and its implementation was started? This is a question again for research. Why should we need to replace this, reinvent the wheel? It is there already. Let's just use it. So failure of spatial and economic planning. Well, I think spatial is a very complicated area. And that is where capacity building of the urban local body representatives is hugely, hugely required. Because as was rightly said, there are private people who are interested. Samir Unhale raised this issue. And the risk of institutional capture by unscrupulous elements is very real, especially in land and unlocking land value. So Professor Uday Shankar raised the issue of rationale of strengthening the ULBs. More than 50% of the globe is governed by central and provincial governments. Absolutely spot on. And public servants, they work with commitment. In fact, somebody had remarked in the chat that why do they work with, they say a lot of things post-retirement. Probably the hint was towards, people like me. But let me place on record. There are less than 5,000 IAS officers for a country of 1.35 billion people. The plate is really full and the ratio is alarming. Now, I'm not saying that we work in isolation, just a band of 5,000, but the point still remains that there is a pyramid of governance. There is a pyramid and assisted by IT-enabled system, but there is a huge shortfall. But that is no excuse for not delivering. That's not the point I'm making. Commitment is not something which can be a medicine given to somebody. Yes, incentivizing it is extremely important. Monitoring is very important at every stage. Unfortunately, monitoring happens at the end of the scheme. It should happen in interim periods, and that the feedback loops are missing. I mentioned that earlier also. Feedback is vital, absolutely vital. From experience, I can say central government schemes beautifully made, but when implemented, there are queries, there are issues. As Mr. Unhale mentioned, this is a very diverse country, which is the equivalent of, let's say, the middle class of India is equal to the entire population of Europe. So with that kind of diversity, you cannot have one policy or one scheme, suitable to the entire country. It will undergo changes. And there is room for maneuver. And that room for maneuver is where community participation is very important, which drives, very rightly said by Professor Uday Shankar, compliance is automatic, minimum enforcement is required if greater participation is institutionalized. And there is no threat to it. When a citizen participates, I think all of us as officers have seen that when somebody comes to your office for grievance redressal, first of all, one doesn't have to make short shrift of his visit. I've always held this, and I've told my staff also, that when somebody comes to the secretariat, he has gone through so many barriers to reach you. Permit lao, ye karo, wo karo, PN rokega. Now, when he has come to meet you, at least hear him out. So if half the problem is solved just by hearing the person, I think we can start with, community participation by just hearing it. And then probably ensuring that what is heard is analyzed. And then I think community will also agree there is data to support or disagree with what they are suggesting. And they will be more than willing to hear the data once they have been heard. So small jurisdiction definitely facilitates this kind of a process. It increases quality of interaction, has better service delivery. And this has been proved time without number in examples in smaller areas of India as well as abroad. And greater participation, better. So let's simplify. Let us establish the rule of law, because it is not simply desirable because of its label. It is a desirable because it hits home each one of us, officer or no officer, politician or no politician. The rule of law ultimately has to prevail. My feeling when I went for my master's to England was, the first feeling I had was that we have so many lakh devtas. In this country, they have only one devta, and that is the system. Dhoop batti agar dete hain, they worship the system. And that is what keeps that country going. Probably the sun never set on the British Empire because they had this ability to administer and the ability to establish the rule of law. So multiplicity of jurisdictions, well, it does facilitate managing risk, but it also, I mean, are you looking for, in the lockdown was a good example, but at the same time, that is a positive side, but there are many negative sides. So it's very important to ring fence jurisdictions. That is very important. So municipal cadre is a huge desirable. And I think we could, if we go beyond the 13th Finance Commission, I think there was an underlying subscript which also talked of something like a municipal cadre. So manner of reforming municipal governance either through private and technical, accountability of elected representatives, these are very important points. They should not be replaced with another system. Well, today we can't do without a PPP. I think it's important, this partnership, because if the role of governments is revisited, is being revisited, Fukuyama has said also, there's so many others, and the governments are overextended, they need to actually make sure that their core functions do not suffer on account of this overextension. Their role as a facilitator in a regulatory regime or a good regulator is more important than direct regulation. So in that way, can we also have such systems or such oversights over municipal functioning, but allow those funds, function and functionaries to actually devolve? And that is why the third tier of governance then doesn't become a white elephant. It's very, very important. And governance normally means making rules and regulations. Well, I think municipal monopoly, probably, we haven't seen it here, that there is a municipal monopoly. It seems we are looking at in Himachal, less, it is one of the least urbanizing of the states. But yes, very important point made by Mr. Unhale is the risk of institutional capture by unscrupulous elements needs fireballing. And municipal corporations could have a share of GST. I think that is a suggestion which should go into the Finance Commission, state finance commissions. And when we look ahead, we're looking at a road ahead where concerns that are the think tank, Niti Aayog has a think tank. It also has a very important wing called innovation. It's very important that it involves the municipalities. Are we unaware of the fact that we have the demographic dividend? We are the youngest country. In the next 25 years, we are likely to be the oldest country in the world. Do we have a policy? We have a policy for the aged, but have we done any vertical involvement of thinking about it, planning about it? I leave you with that thought. And there are so many such arenas where involvement and capacity building and deepening, drilling deep to make ULBs part of the planning process. And then, of course, just as you involve people, if you involve the municipalities, then the compliance will be much more. And of course, that all of it needs a lot of purse releasing for the funds to flow to the municipalities and their capacity building. This has to be a structured program. It cannot be left random. It cannot be left to anybody. It has to be monitored very closely so that capacity is built. Simplification is done. And that is the only mantra which will work to ensure that our third tier of governance become the most effective instrument for a citizen to turn to. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your detailed response to each of our discussants' remarks. And that is truly very, very appreciated. Thank you for your detailed and very meticulous response. Thank you so much. So I would just quickly, we are running out of time, but I would quickly invite our panelists for making a minute or so of their concluding remarks, and also if they could discuss about the way forward. They have already covered it, but if you could just briefly touch upon what are the next steps according to you. I would like to start with Sameer Unhale, sir.
Thank you very much. The response of Chauhan Madam was simply fantastic. It covered all the aspects which we had in our mind. I think one of the challenges, as I said, is the task of implementing things in a municipal setup. We have got around 4,000 odd municipalities, and now making things happen in municipal level would require some innovation even in the capacity building approaches that we are currently having. Yeah. And maybe a toolkit based or an app based or a use of AI and advanced technologies, which will directly tell a acting person what it needs to be done, what could be done. I think could help some task of implementation. Now, I think now the time is less, and we need to able to energize the entire ecosystem of 4,000 odd municipalities and maybe millions of workers and thousands of representatives to make things happen on the ground, and that too very fast. That's it, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would like to invite Uday Shankar, sir, for his concluding thoughts. Sir, over to you.
Just one quick remark that empowering people is very important, and urban local bodies, they do play a very significant role, and therefore we cannot overlook the significance of the urban local bodies. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Professor Mahalia Chatterjee, over to you.
Just to conclude that what has been discussed today should be taken to the relevant authorities so that these thoughts are being implemented, so that urban local bodies get vibrant. They can do what has been given to them as task by the Constitution, and with required resources. And that's the only thing one can hope. And as citizens of the country, we can of course think of the participatory democracy, which was the which can be called the spirit of this 73rd and 74th Amendment. We should given a chance to be responsible citizens with democracy coming to the grassroots, with what committees, area committees, etc., what in whichever name maybe they are called, and of course the accountability of the representatives. Thanks. And thanks once again for asking me to join this panel. I was really enriched by today's discussion.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Certainly, it's an honor. So yes, definitely we'll ensure that we have a report coming out of this, and we'll be sharing with you. So I would like to invite Anshula Mehta, Assistant Director of IMPRI, to propose the formal vote of thanks. Anshula, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. On behalf of IMPRI Center for Habitat, Urban and Regional Studies, I would like to formally thank all of you for joining us today for this web policy talk. We are grateful to our speaker, Dr. Purnima Chauhan, for taking out the time to be with us and for delivering this very wonderful and enlightening talk on innovation and empowerment of ULBs for effective decentralization and accountability. Thank you, ma'am. We are grateful to our moderator, Mr. Tikender Singh Pawar. We would have liked to hear more from him, but unfortunately, I think he had some connection issues. And we are grateful to our discussants, Professor Uday Shankar and Professor Mahalia Chatterjee, for joining us, for sharing their insights and adding depth to this set of deliberations. Thank you. We are grateful to also to Sameer Unhale sir for joining us here and sharing his perspective. And as always, we are grateful to our participants who joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook Live, or would be watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our podcast. We hope that you continue to tune in to future episodes of Local Governance as well as our other web policy talks. Thank you again and good night.
Thank you very much to MP for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the panelists.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks again.
Yes, thank you very much, madam. It was very enlightening to listen to your views. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, Sameer ji.
Thank you.